I'm resident of Collinwood, Jewel Saints, and joining me tonight is Will McKinley, who worked for Jonathan Frid, and Nancy Kersey, who worked for Jonathan Frid. I want to thank you both for taking the time to join me tonight to discuss
Hey,
Jonathan Frid.
hey, Jewel. Thanks for having us. And
Yes.
Nancy, it's good to see you again after these many years.
He's just being funny.
You both look great.
Thank you.
So, Will, you had met Jonathan Frid in 1982.
So Nancy and I were just talking about this. It was actually so. I am unusual in that I discovered Dark Shadows through the movie, through House of Dark Shadows, that my father showed me when I was like 10 or 11. And he was like, "Oh, there used to be this, scary soap opera about vampires, and you would have loved it. Well, they made a movie and it's on Channel 9 today, so watch it." And I watched it, loved it, and was hooked. And then in 1982, the show was sort of relaunched in national syndication by World Vision, and it aired on the NBC affiliate in New York City, WNBC. And so April 12th, 1982, there I was watching, Jonathan's first appearance, immediately got hooked. And then unfortunately, the show didn't do very well in the ratings. And um, so I decided to start a petition to save it and hung it up in my local Key Food supermarket. And I would stand there and I'd be like, sign the petition to save Dark Shadows. And they were like, Dark Shadows, didn't that go off like 12 years ago? And I was like, yeah, but it came on again. And so, so, and through that, I started my own little fanzine and, you know, like met other fans and got involved with a fan group in New York City. There was a national group called the International Dark Shadow Society. At that time, it was I think the only club, and they had a quarterly newsletter. And this couple in New York City, Patrick and Gisette Garrison, decided to start a branch of the club and their own little local fanzine. I met them, started working for the fanzine. We all decided that we were going to start have the first East Coast Dark Shadows convention, because there had been a convention called ShadowCon in Los Angeles or Southern California, and Patrick and Gisette decided to reach out to Jonathan and see if he would be interested in participating. And because he had this long gestating plan to begin these one man shows, I think he saw these conventions as an opportunity, right, as a route to doing that. And so he got involved with our group, and he would come to meetings. Like, I remember the first time I met him was spring of '83. We were at a Greek restaurant in Astoria, Queens, and he just walked in, and he was like, I was 14. I was 14 at that point, so I was still going by Billy. And he was like, "You must be Billy." And I was like, "Oh my God, it's Barbara Collins." and and he was like, "You are an excellent writer." And the thing about Jonathan was he always knew what to say to charm you, right? So he probably knew 14-year-old, aspiring writer, tell me he's a great writer. Boom, you got him. And he was totally right. And he had me, at that point I was like, whatever you want. You want me to write for you? You want me to clean your basement, which we did. I'll do it all. And so yes, so that was how I met him at 14, and then later on the work came.
What about you, Nancy? When did you first meet Jonathan Frid?
I met him in 1985 at a festival I had gone to, but I didn't really meet him properly until 1986. I did a review of what I had seen at the previous festival, a work in progress he was doing, and I was writing for a theater publication in Philadelphia. And anyway, someone had sent him a copy of the review, and he got a hold of me. Actually, I think it might have been Will who called me the first time, invited me to come up to his apartment to meet him and attend a rehearsal. I lived 2 hours away, and I went up there a few times, and then he and Mary asked me to come work for them as a writer. And that's what I did. So in about the spring of '86, that's what I wound up doing. And was going to move into New York anyway. I wanted to pursue a career as a writer and an actor. And I was going to move to New York anyway, and I wound up doing that. And he was very helpful.
If I can add, but Nancy's origin story with Dark Shadows stretches way far back before all of this, right, Nancy? Like, when did you start? Didn't you start watching the show very early on?
Yeah, I did. I watched it. I think it was April of '67. I had mentioned this to Jewel earlier, that I had a show I watched at 4:00. Wee Willie Weber's Cartoon Hour. And I turned the TV on before that, maybe 15 minutes before that, and I saw a few episodes of the show, and then I saw Barnabas come out of the coffin, and I was so excited because I loved vampires. And I ran upstairs and told my mother that there was another vampire besides Bela Lugosi, which I thought was just an amazing thing. So, and that's how I got started watching it. And I watched it, read the books, all that.
Cool. When you folks started working for Jonathan, what's the one thing you both wanted to accomplish to sort of help his career?
One thing, I was looking to get things on my resume.
Right.
Number one. And I wanted to work with him because he was the reason I went into theater to begin with. And I particularly was enamored of vocal presentations. I used to buy records with different actors reciting poetry and prose, short stories. And so I wanted to be a part of that Reader's Theater. I was a big advocate of that, and actually had done some of that prior to working for Jonathan. So, and I wanted to help propel him into this field.
What about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, in my case, and I say this in the documentary, I wrote him a letter, after, so I had worked for him, and doing sort of menial jobs like organizing his archives, or like, I remember one time I was like, give me something to do, I want to work for you. And so he gave me these like 20 accordion folders, and he was like, okay, organize these. And so I was still young enough at this point that my parents would pick me up after our committee meetings at his apartment.
He was like 13 or 14 years old.
I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like my mommy and daddy would come to Jonathan Frid's apartment. And Jonathan was so funny. Like, my father was younger than he was, but he would call him Mr. McKinley because Jonathan was so proper, And I remember my mother saying to Jonathan, like, what's your secret? How do you get him to do things? Like, I can't get him to do anything. He won't even like pick up his room at home. And Jonathan was just very polite to them. So I did this like organizing job for him. And then one time I was over there dropping something off, and he said, listen to this. New Jersey Network, which at that point was running the show, they want me to do some promos. So they sent these scripts. What do you think? And so he read me the first script, and I was like, I could do better than that. I was 14, I was 15, whatever. And he was like, okay, go do it. So he put me in the other room. I sat down, and I just wasn't like, it was very weird, like knowing that he and his assistant were out like in the other room waiting for me. So I was like, let me go home and work on this. Went home, like worked all night, came back the next morning. And this was the first time I had ever gone to his apartment, like on the New York City subway system by myself. I was like, whatever, 15. And I remember when I got there, he was standing outside the apartment, like in his robe and slippers with a cup of coffee, because he was like, I was afraid you were going to get lost. And then I brought in the scripts to him, and he was like, these are great. And he, his assistant came over, or the Ann Wilson, who was who worked for the Dark Shadows Festival at that point, but was sort of assisting him. And she typed them up, and he was like, okay, let me read through them. And I was like, all right, well, so Jonathan Frid's going to like rehearse my scripts in front of me. And so at one point I was like, oh, you should wink when you say that. And he's like, I'm not going to wink. And then a couple of weeks later, I finally watched the promos when they aired on New Jersey Network, and he winked. So it was just the strangest thing to be that young and to see like your idol performing stuff that you wrote on television. I mean, Nancy, you had to feel that way, right? When you would see him, when he would perform things that you wrote.
Right. And if they got a big laugh and so on. Yeah. Oh yeah. It was a great feeling, because my job was to write narratives in between the stories in his Reader's Theater, and also help write original pieces. And so it was marvelous. And of course it was a great thing too, to have him listen to me. And of course, what was funny was he was very intense when he worked, and so was I. And Jonathan would argue over a drop of a hat in that kind of a situation. And the thing is, I will too. So we would go at it, and then it would be resolved. Somebody was right, somebody was wrong. Usually I was the one who was wrong. No, in his view. No, but he did listen. And he didn't hold, like you could have a scrap with him and he'd be over it, and I'd be over it. But that was just the way we worked. Because when I first worked for him, I said, I'm not a yes man. If I don't like something, I will tell you. And I'm just that way. And he liked that, because he knows I was always telling the truth.
And it's interesting because, Nancy, that you mentioned, sort of tussling with him. Mm-hmm. I was watching the documentary last night, and one thing that struck me in one of the letters that Ian Buchanan read, one of the letters that Jonathan had written to his parents when he was a young actor trying to make it in New York City. And he wrote in the letter to his parents, talking about an audition, for once I didn't talk too much. And it's so, when I heard that, I remembered this moment where I was sitting opposite him at the desk in his apartment, and Mary O'Leary was sitting next to me, and I was like going on about something, and he banged on the table and he was like, William, you're talking too much. So this was a thing that he had thought was like wrong with himself as a young man, right? Mm-hmm. That he thought he was too smart or had too much to say. And he saw it in me and immediately called me on it. And I remember when he said that to me, I was like, well, isn't that a switch? And Mary looked at me like, and then afterwards we were walking to the subway, and she put her hand on my shoulder and she's like, are you okay? And I was like, why? And she was like, he yelled at you. And I was like, he always does that, and we'll forget about it next time.
Well, Will also told me this story, if he remembers it. I don't remember the entire context, but Will told me this story that he was at Jonathan's, and I think Jonathan liked to try to scare people sometimes if his opinion was being challenged. And he had banged on his desk. And Will said, I felt the color leave my face.
Well, he was a scary, like he could be a scary guy when you would
yes.
when you would be sitting there in that apartment and he would do like, I don't know, the Telltale Heart.
Yeah.
You know, like it was a little scary. He was very intense, you know?
Yeah.
But the great thing about him was that, like, and Nancy and I were talking about this before, like if he was rude to you, then he knew, like you knew you were, like he respected you. That sounds weird, but like you know, he would be overly fakely friendly or overly deferential to people that he didn't know very well. But if he knew you, he would like hit you with the truth and you just had to deal. Right, Nancy?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
Did Jonathan ever want to do like or get into radio at all after when he was with you guys either?
No, it's interesting because I've gotten hooked recently on the CBS Radio Mystery Theater, which began, I think, in maybe like 74 or so. And the host was E.G. Marshall, and it was on every day, and they did hundreds and hundreds of episodes. Just a really, really great show. Nancy, have you listened to this show?
I have, yes.
Okay, so it's really, really good show. And he would have been perfect on that show because he had such a great voice, and because it was radio, he could read the script.
Yes.
So he didn't have to remember lines.
No.
You know? And I just every time I listen to this series, I think, God, I wish he had done this because it could have been there were some actors that did literally like 100 episodes of that show or more, you know? And he would have been perfect on that. I mean, the closest he got to that was when we were in the midst of doing his one-man shows. He got hired by MCI, the telecommunications company, to do something called the MCI Halloween Hotline. And he read a cut down version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And I remember because I was there with Mary, like we produced the session. We were at a sound studio in New York City. And, you know, he did the reading of the story. And then it was on, you could call that Halloween season, you could call up the 1-800 number and listen to him do it. And in fact, I think the recording, pretty sure the recording is on Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid story, available on DVD and Blu-ray at retailers near you. And it's fabulous. I mean, you know, for the reasons you were talking about, Nancy, like the voice, he just, you know, had this great voice and put him in like front of a fancy microphone in a sound studio, and it was just like the voice of God.
Yes. Yeah. I would have liked to have seen him do more of that, and I don't know why he didn't. If I ever knew, I've forgotten, but that would have been great to have had more of those.
And he did do that Big Finish story, but that was much later in life, and
yes,
you know, and his voice was a little bit different. So but yeah, that for folks who, one of the great things about, I'm a big physical media proponent, and one of the great things about buying this on physical media is you get all of these special features, including one of the New Jersey Network promos that I wrote for him, and also footage of me and my sister on the phone bank answering phones when he was hosting the New Jersey Network telethon.
Yes.
Oh my God, it's like he's up there being like, you know, call in and pledge. You have to see it. If you've
my
never
wife's
seen
in that too. Yes.
And Kay's in it. Yeah,
yes.
exactly. Yeah. And Tom, a bunch of people we know from back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw you both on the DVD. I saw you wearing a Barnabas Collins pin with.
Yes. It's I used to so I thought at 14, I thought, won't it be a great idea to go to Jonathan Frid's apartment and wear a Barnabas Collins pin? And I walked into his apartment, Nancy, you'll love this. I walked into his apartment, he was like, "Are you wearing a Barnabas Collins pin?" And I was like, "Yes." And he's like, "Don't do that.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't
yeah.
wear a Barnabas
If you
Collins
were
pin."
working, if you were working for him, he didn't want you. Not that I did, but he didn't want you to be dressing up in any DS thing or whatever. I mean, because that's has nothing to do with what he's doing. I mean, his view, he wanted you to come in there dressed normally.
And he also was very much and by the time I really started working for him with Mary, I was beyond being a fan. I think like he he needed to see us as like professionals in order to, not that he didn't respect the fans, because he did,
Mm-hmm.
but he wouldn't have fans in his apartment telling him what he should do in his career.
Right.
He regarded us, whether it was accurate or not, I hope it was, he regarded us as professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And me walking in with a Barnabas Collins pin did not
Yeah.
help my case as a professional.
No.
So he was like, cut that out.
No, I
You know?
remember when I had started with him, we had gone to that local pub.
Pete's
You
Tavern.
No, the other one that you said had the brown bread, the brown
Uh,
bread people.
oh,
Remember?
Tuesdays?
Yes, Fat Tuesdays.
Right.
And we went in there, and I remember having a conversation with Jonathan, and he says, "I'm not going to talk to you like a fan."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "No," I said, "No," and I said, it's really important that you understand that I say what I think, and you're not, some idol to me. At that point, once he shook my hand and kissed my hand, it was over. I mean, that was lovely, and I thought I would die. But after that, he was just a person to me.
Yeah, and it was the same thing. It was like when he showed up at that Greek restaurant in Astoria, Queens in 1983, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's Jonathan Frid." By the next time, I was like, it sounds weird to think that like a 14-year-old is ambitious, but I was ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there was some part of me who was thinking, how can I turn this into a career?
Yeah. Smart.
Right. Sorry.
That's all right.
sorry, I was going to say. When Jonathan did House of Dark Shadows, going from the series to the movie, the DVD sort of talks about this. How did he feel about that?
The House of Dark Shadows itself?
Yes.
Oh, he hated it. He thought he said it was like bad porn. That's how he described it.
And it's so funny because Nancy and I have been, so Nancy, we met at this point 35 years ago.
Yes.
35 years ago.
Yes.
And so for 35 years, we've been debating the merits of House of Dark Shadows because it is my opinion that House of Dark Shadows is the most perfect iteration of Dark Shadows ever created, full stop. It is the thing in my mind that if somebody said, we have to burn it all, we have to burn all the masters, but we can only save one thing, I would be like, save that movie and burn everything else. And
I'd say burn the movie, but anyway, that's just my opinion.
well, but that's interesting because you came to Dark Shadows through the show. I came to Dark Shadows through the movie. So that's how I discovered the character.
Sure.
But it's also partially that in retrospect, I do not think that Dark Shadows would be as known and respected today as it is if the movie didn't exist, because like people today forget, so you can watch it on Tubi, right? Or you can watch it on IMDb TV, or you can watch it on Amazon Prime. For many, many years, the only thing that was circulating was the movie.
That's true. That's
So
certainly
when
true.
my father showed it to me in 1980, that's the only Dark Shadows thing you could see. Like the show was not in syndication. There was no such thing as VHS tapes or DVDs or internet or anything. So for years and years and years, that movie running on local stations kept awareness of the show alive. And it may not have been as perfect for a lot of people as I thought it was, but at least it was something, right? And so I'm convinced that without that movie airing a couple times a year, every year from the late 70s through when the show came back in syndication, that, the show might have been forgotten.
I
But
can't argue with that.
But to answer your question, Jewel, no. I mean, Jonathan did not like it. And, he talks about this extensively in the documentary, which is available on DVD and Blu-ray.
Yep.
Thanks. He would say all the time how much he loved the fact that he got to play so many different aspects of the character on television. He got to play the young romantic hero in 1795, and he got to play the heartless, vicious killer when he's, kidnapping Maggie and killing Dr. Woodard and threatening Dr. Hoffman, and and he got to play the hero and like the Ghostbuster and all these different, characters.
Yep.
And in the movie, he's, a bad guy. And Dan Curtis says it in the documentary. We basically got to, like let him, like go loose on the, on the characters and do exactly what they wanted to do in the TV series, but couldn't do because he became too popular. But yeah, no, he didn't like the one-dimensional nature of the movie.
And
And
he
also,
also just didn't like horror movies too. I mean, he didn't like the genre in general.
yeah, which is weird. I mean, it's like, he's a horror icon in a sense, but he preferred the, the real life horror of betrayal and,
The psychological horror. He liked good ghost stories because sometimes I would see a ghost story on TV and I would call and tell him about it, and he would do the same with me. I remember The Changeling with George C. Scott. I called and told him about it. It was on TV and it was going to be on again, and he watched it and he enjoyed it. It was a ghost story, but that was about it.
Yeah, and in fact, again, another interesting thing in the documentary is that, Dan said, let's make a sequel. Like MGM wants a sequel. And Jonathan once told me that he didn't say no, but he did say, I'll do it for $1 million. And the entire budget of the whole first movie wasn't even close to $1 million. And so that was his way of saying, I'm not going to do it, but if you need a offer, there's my offer. And it's, not attainable. I will tell you that if I could invent a time machine and go back, I would change his mind. Because by all rights, Dark Shadows should have transitioned from a daytime soap opera for 11-year-olds into a Hammer style series of horror movies, starting with Jonathan and then maybe extending to other, supernatural characters as well. But like they could have made a series of films, and I think they would have done really, really well, and it would have been a really interesting evolution of the show. But that stopped when Jonathan said no. You know.
Um, when when I was watching the documentary, it talked about his theater career in great length, which was awesome to hear about. He really seemed to prefer the theater over the, doing something on screen like a movie. Would I be wrong in saying that or
Oh
no?
yeah. Oh yes. He didn't like the whole movie process. Uh, he preferred the theater. He really didn't pursue uh, movie work uh, at all. Uh, he didn't pursue much TV work after Dark Shadows.
Well, and he talks about this, about being, you know, of loving the rhythm of theater, and when he felt like he had mastered the material, right?
Mm-hmm.
That process of being able to, tweak certain things, like when you know it so well, and you can tweak a line delivery, like, this would be even more of the case in something like Arsenic and Old Lace, where, I mean, Nancy, it's like with comedy, you can
Yeah.
say something slightly differently and get a completely different reaction. And so I think he liked the fact that he could try those new things every night.
He
And that
did. Yeah.
yeah, and I think he also liked not being nervous about learning a new script.
He did. He had me help him learn lines for Arsenic and Old Lace, and it was very interesting. I would run the lines with him, and he wanted me to act the roles, all the roles in the scenes that he was doing. So I'd be doing that, which was fun, and he would have he would record, and then he would have me uh, record a line, and then he'd leave a space on the tape recorder for his response. And then I would read a line again, and then he would leave a space on his tape recorder for his response. So when I wasn't there with him, that's how he learned the lines.
So he would practice with your voice on the tape recorder.
He would.
Interesting.
Cool. That's really cool. That's
And were
awesome.
you, Nancy, remind me, were you there on opening night of Arsenic and Old Lace?
I was. I drove him there. I had my car, and I drove him to in fact, he went to get flowers for the ladies. He went to the theater in the afternoon because he was nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sat there opening night thinking, oh my God, he's going to say Jonathan Frid instead of Jonathan Brewster. I kept thinking that might happen. It didn't happen. But oh yeah, he was marvelous. He was marvelous in it, and he did very well.
And I mean, I hope this doesn't sound mean, but because I only knew him. It's like people ask me sometimes, like, was it weird to sit in Barnabas Collins' apartment and like work with him? And the thing is that when I was in that apartment and when I was working with him, I never once thought of him as Barnabas. He was
No, me
Jonathan.
neither. That never occurred to me.
And he was just a guy, and he was just an actor. And he allowed us to see his whatever insecurities and
Yeah.
and his nerves. And so yeah, the night that he debuted in Arsenic and Old Lace on Broadway in December of 1986, I was like, oh, he's gonna blow it. He's gonna right. And I sat there like I was in, I don't know, way in the front. And
Were
I
you
was
with
just,
me? Were you with me? Well, I don't remember. Were we
I
together? No.
we probably were. And I was like going like this. because I was like, I just don't want, him to blow it. Not that I thought he would blow it, but it had been so long since he was in the spotlight like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, he had not done anything of that note really in a decade and a half.
Well, see, I knew he was going to be okay because he recorded. I bought him for his birthday before I realized he didn't like having his birthday acknowledged. I had bought him this little recorder. He put a tape in it, and he taped the rehearsals he had with Gene Stapleton and everybody else, and he would let me hear them. And he was on point with his lines. So I was confident he was going to do all right. I always worried that he would say Jonathan Frid instead of Jonathan Brewster.
And he talks about being nervous and not really being as strong as he wanted to during that 2-week period where they were on Broadway before they went on the national tour. But to my eyes that night, he was brilliant.
He was.
And then I went again on New Year's Eve. You were not there.
No, I was not there.
And that Mary was there, and we went out on New Year's Eve. And I remember, like, at that point, I would think I was 17, maybe. So I had my first like alcoholic beverage on New Year's Eve, 86, 87. I had a mimosa. And then I sort of like tipsily went back to my parents' house on Long Island. But I thought he just did great. And then you and I went to see him on a number of stops on that tour, right?
Yes, we did. We did.
We saw him in Philadelphia. We saw him in Boston. We saw him in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And it was always great, always fun.
Yeah, it was fun. We had a good time. And lots of times when I would go see him, he was able to do some of his one-man shows in some of the cities on Monday, the theater's night off. So I would go, I would be working with him, would go there, and I would work with him on the show, or he would just be making some fine points on it. Yeah, it was quite something. That was something. He didn't do another stage play until Mass Appeal, which didn't go as well opening night.
But that was many years later.
That was many years later. Yeah.
Yeah. But at that period, at that period, 1986, it was like, it felt, and I say this in the documentary, like it felt like, we had a goal and we, succeeded, and we got him back out there in front of people.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great.
When did Jonathan first maybe say about wanting to do a one-man show?
I mean, I remember as early as, so when the show started on WNBC in New York, 1982, Jonathan appeared. He had not really been in public, certainly on television. He made an appearance on a local talk show called Live at 5. Do you remember Live at 5 on Channel 4, Nancy?
Mm-hmm.
And it was before like the local news. And I remember seeing him on that show, and he said something on Live at 5 about like wanting to get back, into performing and be on stage and maybe a one-man show. And that was the first time that I really heard him. But at that point, I think he had already started, when he would go to something like ShadowCon, he had already started to do readings. And initially it was a lot of like, it was some material written by fans. And only then when he did the live specials on New Jersey Network in late 84 and early 85 did he publicly say, I'm planning to do a one-man show. And in fact, one of the pieces that he performed on the New Jersey Network special, The Telltale Heart, ended up being in his first one-man show. So he was already giving people a preview of it. And it was when he mentioned that he intended to do that one-man show that Mary O'Leary, who was watching on television, had the, inclination to write him a letter and say, I'm a, trained theater professional, stage manager, would love to work with you. And it was that letter that Mary wrote, combined with one that I had written, that basically put the three of us together, Jonathan, Mary, and me, in April of 1985, when Jonathan just, decided he wanted to really pursue this seriously.
Yeah, that's amazing. How important was it, not just to Jonathan, but to perhaps Dark Shadows, that they casted this Shakespearean actor, that they casted Jonathan Frid? You think?
I don't. The role wasn't considered that important at the time.
Right.
It was a filler role to kickstart more interest in the show. I mean, he was to be killed off in 13 weeks.
Right.
And the week before Jonathan was to first appear as Barnabas, he was called into the writers to see the writers every weekend. He thought, my God, I've already been fired. And actually what they wanted to do was they wanted to talk to him about the role, get his ideas and everything about the part. And one of the people he had gone to school with, Ron Sproat at Yale, was familiar with Jonathan's work because he had seen Jonathan on stage at Yale. So they were interested in making the character interesting, which of course is a writer's survival instinct, to make a character interesting so the character stays and that you could write more for the character. But it was a one-off. It was a 13-week one-off character. Also, one thing, Jonathan really didn't do that much Shakespeare. I mean, and he's called a Shakespearean actor, but actually, I think what the press means when they say he's a classically trained actor, which is a different thing. He really didn't do all that much Shakespeare. He happened to love it, but.
And Laura says it in the documentary that, people remember Dark Shadows because of Jonathan. Mm-hmm. If it had been anybody, and that's no knock on, the rest of the cast, right, or the quality of the writing, or, I mean, Dark Shadows it's impossible to empirically define, I think, what it is about Dark Shadows that makes it so timeless and so, everlasting in its popularity. But Laura said it best in the documentary that, like, we wouldn't still be talking about this if it wasn't for Jonathan and what he brought to that character.
I agree.
I mean, it was just, and you watch it now and it's like, it's so surprising because, a differently trained actor, a less talented actor, would have come on and been like, I'm the killer. I'm going to act like the killer. And maybe it was because he was nervous in real life, or maybe it was because he's a brilliant actor, but he played it like exactly the opposite. He was like the scaredest guy in the room when he was playing Barnabas. And yes, he could pivot to, I'm going to kill you. But there was such nuance to that character that he brought. And so, yeah, I don't think that the show would have been saved from cancellation in 1967 if it had been a different actor. And I certainly don't think it would be as popular as it is today, where there are tons of people every day discovering it on, streaming. And you have all these new fans who are like, oh, I just saw this episode for the first time, and I'm like, this is 55 years old, and people are acting like it's brand new, you know? And that's pretty cool in a way, you
You
know?
even get people saying spoiler alerts in some groups.
I was like, how can you
Yeah.
spoil something that aired in 1967?
I don't know.
Speaking as a fellow fan of Dark Shadows, and I think Jonathan being cast as Barnabas, even though they didn't maybe realize that at the time of how big the character would go, going to become with him being the character, him being cast as Barnabas to me is as big, if not more big, and Donald Pleasance being cast as Sam Loomis, or it's right there.
Right.
It
It
was
was just,
huge,
I mean, it was just serendipitous
right?
that it worked out that way, and the writers took interest in him and what could be done. I mean, Dan Curtis had nothing to do with Jonathan being cast in this.
Right. Right.
I know he's presented it that way, but according to Jonathan told me, that wasn't the case.
Well,
But
and Dan even says it in the documentary. It's like they sent him a picture and was like, oh, I like that guy in the cape, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that happened myself, but
oh,
anyway.
really? Okay.
Yeah, no. I mean, he was in Europe, and this was a small part. I mean, it was not seen as being that big a deal.
Oh, so you think it basically just happened without him?
No, I don't think it happened with no. I think Robert Costello said, okay, he's fine. Sign him up for the 13 weeks. No, I don't think it happened that way at all.
Well, I mean, however it happened, it was serendipitous because
It was.
nobody else would have, but it's also like, you look at characters that made a show, like, I don't know, Jonathan Harris on Lost in Space. It's right, like, on paper, it's like the character, you would never have played him like this, right? But it works so well, and it's what people remember from that show, and there's a million other examples, Donald Pleasance in Halloween, any of the iconic characters in any franchise, there's always some, like wild card element that makes it work.
Well, it's just like Christopher Lee. I don't think Christopher Lee, up until Dracula, I found him very wooden as an actor. But whatever it was about Dracula, he just transformed as an actor altogether. It was just an amazing transformation for me. And when I look back on, the Dark Shadows, and I would argue with Jonathan about the importance of Barnabas being one of the most interesting characters in television history. Certainly most iconic. He just said, "Oh, no." and I would say, "You're wrong." No, you're wrong. And, and there we would go. And I mean, it was, but he just didn't get it.
I mean, I would add to that he didn't think, all he saw was what he did wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like, he knew with an extra day of rehearsal on every episode, he could have been so much better. So he would look, and on the rare occasions I would be over there at 6:30 and the show would be on New Jersey Network, he would turn on the TV and he would just howl, right? He would cackle. He would be like, "Oh my God, how is it that people like this?" And
I know.
he was like, "This is terrible." And I was like, you know what, dude, just chill out, because like, we all really like it, right?
it depended on the day you caught him on, though. Some days he would say, wow, we really did some good work there. And then other days, oh my God. Yeah. So sometimes it would just depend on the day you caught him.
That is true. That is true. I mean, and fundamentally, I think that he let go of the ego part of it and was like, look, if people like this, great, I'm thrilled. But I think deep down, it always, like irked him that it wasn't as he wasn't as good. He, not it, not the show, not his not his cast members, but that he wasn't as good as he wanted him to be.
The bloopers were embarrassing to him. Mm-hmm. And in fact, a lot of times he thought that's why people watched the show, was just to look for bloopers. They embarrassed him. I mean, he played the good sport at festivals, but he really was embarrassed by it and thought people watched the show just for that.
Well, and the thing is, it's like, if and Jewel, you're a fan, so you know this. It's like, if you're a true fan, you love the bloopers as much as you love the scariest moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you love it all because you can't take the component parts out of something that works and still have it work. Dark Shadows is this inexplicable amalgam of things that, when you put them all together, works so perfectly well. And if you start taking pieces out, it might not work so well.
I think in anything, with any franchise, there's always going to be a blooper here, a blooper. When I watched Dark Shadows on the Sci-Fi Network, I watched it from the beginning. They aired it from the beginning. So
from the Vicky beginning, or the
the beginning. From the
Bill Malloy and all those.
Yep. Yeah. And I fell in love. So I love the bloopers. I love what they do. It just, I own the Coffin box set. I drive my wife nuts about it. But I just love it for what it is. It's beautiful to watch and it's beautiful to talk about. If I could ever have said anything to Jonathan Frid, it would have been, we love you and we love this show.
Yeah.
But sorry.
And I think, if I can respond to that, I think that Jonathan respected, and he's again, I wrote down another thing when I was watching last night. He said, I know what a fan feels like because I've been one. He was talking about working with Katharine Hepburn in Much Ado About Nothing. So I do think that he respected. He may have at times been baffled by it, but I do think he respected the passion and affection of the fans.
Yeah. I remember some people in his presence were, I don't want to say faulting fans, but not taking them as seriously. And Jonathan stood up for him. He says they're just romantic.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Yeah, we never and I was a fan. I mean, we were both fans, right? Mm-hmm. And Mary was a fan too. She started watching when she was a kid. So we would never. I do not ever remember an occasion where we would sit around and be like, "Oh, the fans," Mm-hmm. I mean,
no,
because at the very least, besides us being one of them, they were also the customer, right? Yeah. I mean, they were the customer for these shows. So if you can't, you can't create a piece of art for an audience that you don't have some fundamental respect for.
No, I think he was only disappointed when he was doing Arstic and Olays. Fans would show up on the back door and admit that they hadn't seen the play. They just came to get an autograph at the back door, but didn't didn't see the play, the Arsenic and No Lace. They didn't have any interest in seeing that. That's not, I mean, that's not to say that fans didn't go see it, but there were fans who just came for the autograph backstage. And Gene Stapleton said that Jonathan did the best backstage business of all the actors.
And Marion Ross, who's one of the interviewees in the documentary, says, like, people would come to the stage door and they weren't there for us. They were there for him.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
What is you got? Or sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say that, you know, he had a complicated relationship with the show. I think it was for the best that he took a long break from it. I think he took as long of a break as he thought he could and still maybe be remembered. Because he basically, I mean, he didn't take a decade off, but he was largely out of the public eye from, you know, from when the show ended until, you know, the early to mid 80s. And that's
you were there in that conversation we had with in Jonathan's apartment with Mary there, and I said to him, you know, we're talking about publicity, promotional. I said, we have to let people know that you're alive.
Well, and you know, which reminds me, so, and I think you know this, Nancy. So there's an interview with Jonathan in the documentary that has never been seen anywhere else in 35 years. And the reason it's never been seen is because it's been in a box in my basement.
Yes.
So this is a piece when I was in NYU in film school, my senior year, one of my projects for my senior video production class was a little mini documentary on Jonathan Frid. It was a 12-minute documentary that I did. And we shot it in his apartment. Nancy and I shot it in his apartment, early 86.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the camera and Nancy did the interview. And I remember, and so, you know, when Mary O'Leary 2 years ago called me and said, so we're going to do a documentary on Jonathan, is there any chance that you have anything that nobody's ever seen? And I was like, well, as a matter of fact, and I sent her that master tape, and it had not been touched in 35 years. And Mary was like, oh, it's so cute. There's like Jonathan giving you guys advice on the, like, apparently when I haven't listened to it, but apparently at one point he says to me, like, stop being so nervous.
Yeah. And I didn't think you were being nervous. I thought he was nervous.
But the interesting thing is that when you're interviewing him, one of the questions is you ask him sort of like, so what are you known for? And he says, Dark Shadows. And you're like, what's that?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, interview documentary.
Well,
and everybody knows.
But the thing is, it's like everybody in my film class watching that, like none of them were, maybe they were babies when Dark Shadows was on, but they certainly didn't know who the hell he was.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it was lucky that you asked him that question, because I put in the answer, you know, where he explains what Dark Shadows is, because nobody in my, you know, senior film class at NYU knew what it was or knew who he was. Wow. So you can see there's a bunch of excerpts from that, and I was really happy after 35 years that Mary was able to make good use of this essentially unseen, not essentially, but completely unseen interview that we did with him in 1986.
Wow. That's awesome. It's really, really cool.
And if you want to see what part it is when you're watching the documentary, it's he's sitting on the couch his couch with all the pictures on the wall right behind him. And I remember he was like, "Didn't you bring lights?" And I was like, "I'm a film student. What do you cut me some slack?" And so he was like, we have to have some light." So he took the lampshade off the lamp to be his key light. And he's like, "It's important that you learn about things like lighting, William." So I did.
That's amazing. I love that. When did Jonathan talk about wanting to do a website? Do you know? Yes.
He didn't. He in 1999, I think it was. I had suggested to him that he have a website. It would be a way to stay in touch with fans, and it would give him another avenue for doing reading pieces. And it was a new medium. He didn't know anything about it. He didn't know how to turn a computer on or anything. So I got him into that world, and he hired people to help him with it up in Canada. I mean, at first when he had the website, I was going up there 2 times a month. And so I couldn't keep that up. So he eventually hired a webmaster. But that's when he decided to do that, to keep in touch and to do performances.
And he would do like full stories and post them, right?
Full stories, a lot of Shakespeare. And the thing is, he would have the people would have to go through a certain. He would decide. It wasn't a menu on there or a site map. He wanted you to see certain things at certain times, which was a pain in the ass, let me tell you.
I bet.
So, and the thing is, it was the site would go down sometimes because there was just so many graphics on there that it just couldn't sustain the traffic for a time.
He was ahead of his time in terms of bandwidth, right?
Bandwidth. He didn't understand bandwidth, and people would get exasperated because they wanted to see certain things. It took him a while. I eventually learned that, but it took him a while to come around to that way.
I would literally sit at my computer when Jonathan Frid's website was up, and I would listen to him reading Shakespeare and listen to the Jonathan, because I remember the design, Jonathan Frid's Fools, Fiends, and
yeah,
I remember that, and I loved it. I loved that website. It was amazing. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was funny because he was on AOL at one point, and I would be talking with him via Messenger and AOL. And when you would come into the room, there'd be the creaking when you did the Messenger. He goes, "What's that? What are you doing?" He said, "You trying to be funny?" Because he thought I was making coffin noises, and it was just the way coffin lid noises. I said, "No, that's just the sound when you come into a chat that it makes. I wasn't making a coffin noise."
I think it's hilarious to think of Jonathan on AOL.
He's on AOL, and the first email he sent me, all he said was "Tally ho."
Well, he was
hilarious.
But he was, to his credit, he was willing to, like, if that was the venue, right? If that's where he had to go to get an audience,
mm-hmm.
He was willing to. I mean, how many 70-something-year-old or 80-year-old people are going to get on the internet for the first time? I mean, so I think it's to his credit that he was willing to learn how to exist in that world.
I remember when he called and told me that he bought a computer. I simply couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it.
Because he was a bit of a Luddite. I mean, I used to have to program his VCR.
Yes.
He would, he loved to record. People are always surprised to hear that he was a big American football fan, and he used to love to record football games. And like he would ask whenever I was over there working, because it would usually be on a weekend, right? He would be like, "Oh, can you set it for the game tomorrow?"
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, but he generally he was a bit of a techno phobe.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. What is there a memory you guys have of Jonathan that you remember most about him, or that you enjoyed the most?
His humor. He was a practical joker. Um, and he liked trying new things. Um, he would I just think it was his humor more than anything else, because he was very funny. He was one of the funniest people I've ever known in my life.
And it's interesting because he like I didn't really see that side of him because I mean, Nancy, like you and I will like do shtick or whatever.
Yeah.
But I wasn't like that with him initially, you know, because for me, I was like, I kept waiting for the day where he was going to look at me and be like, why the hell are you 16, 15, 17, whatever it was? Why are you here? You know, right? I just wanted to keep making him think that I was mature enough and serious enough and professional enough to have a seat at the table. So I wasn't inclined to be, you know, Joe Comedian. But then when you showed up, right, then it was like it was a different vibe, you know, and we could be silly, you know, and jokey, and he would and he then adjusted to that wavelength, right? It's like his way of working with me alone was different than his way of working with Mary alone, which was different than his way of working with you alone, which was different than his way of working with various combinations of us. And it was fun to see that side of him because I really hadn't seen it before.
Yeah, he told me one time, he said that I made him feel young.
That's nice. And it was fun. I mean, he would be like, you know, for lack of a better term, you know, like he would definitely be sillier around you than and I think part of me, like, even though we were friendly and, you know, and I saw him a lot, like I was 15, 16, 17 years old. I was never going to be like his pal. We were never going to go out and like go drinking or something. So that was really not the relationship I had with him. Whereas you, I think, like whatever, you guys would go out drinking, right? I mean, you would go out to the bar or, you know, and hang out and shoot the shit. And that was, you know, that was a great thing for you in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, because we liked old movies. He loved old movies and all the characters, and we would talk about that and different stage things and just life in general. I think it was just um, the way to look at things. I don't know. It's just a normal thing. And I remember actually, one of the actors on Dark Shadows asked me this question when they'd heard that I'd gone up to Canada to visit Jonathan. They said, "Well, what do you do? What do you talk about?" And I was like, "What you normally talk about when you go visit somebody." You know, they show you local things, or you'll do things locally, or whatever. I mean, not any different than going to visit Will or anybody I know. There's nothing different. Nothing different. Nothing. One of my friends was very funny when he had met Jonathan, came to my 40th birthday party. And he said that when Jonathan came in the room, he didn't hear the angels sing. And I and I later told Jonathan that, and he thought that was very funny. No, it was just a normal person. You go visit and you just do normal things. And I had friends all of my life who were older, a generation older than myself. And Will was the first person that I had who was a generation younger than myself.
And I also, I mean, thanks to Dark Shadows, at that point, I was, even when I was like 13 or 14, all of the fans that I met for the show were at least a decade older, if not more. So, I definitely was comfortable with, like, you and Mary, who were in your 20s when I was in my teens, but it was a little bit different when, whatever, you're 15 and,
yeah, that's a different thing altogether. I mean, that's a significant, and you're a male, it makes, you can see where it would be different.
Yeah, and if I'm being completely honest, I always, like, Dark Shadows was important enough to me, and the emotional response I had to the show was important enough to me that I wanted to kind of maintain that, So even though I spent a lot of time with Jonathan and we were, worked together very closely, I didn't want to lose him as the icon. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I understand that. Yeah, I understand.
It's almost like I didn't want to be his buddy too much. I wanted to still maintain him as, as this character.
I never set out to be a friend. I mean, that wasn't like a goal or anything. I mean, in my mind, and it just evolved into that. We do things outside of, walk all over the city. You know how much you like to walk, and just turned into it. But see, I've never been a starstruck person. I'm not saying you were, but I've never been a starstruck person. I meet somebody and shake their hand or whatever, and it's just normal after that. And I was I teased him when we were in Baltimore. I had gone down to Baltimore to see him in that show Arsenic, and I had spent the night actually in Gene Stapleton's room. I'd spent the night there, and the next morning, Jonathan and I went out to have breakfast in the morning, and he was sitting. We were going in a place, one of the first people there, and the sunlight was coming in at intense angles. And he kept saying, "Oh, I can't sit there. There's too much sun." And I said, "Oh, I forgot." And I threw my coat over his head. Now, he thought that was, I mean, and he just said, "Ho, ho, ho." But see, I was very irreverent. I mean, I wasn't, I wasn't taken by all that.
Yeah, and I think that he appreciated it. It's like, I remember one time I said to him, he was saying something slightly overblown, and I was like, like, wherever two or more are gathered in his name, there Frid is. And he thought that was, very funny. I think he liked the fact that we may have initially started as, like, his fans, but we shed that and became his, colleagues and sort of his friend,
Well, he was in a traffic jam, remember, in Canada. I think he would have driven to Toronto, and somebody wouldn't let him in line. And I said, and he rolled down the window, and he was doing with his hand, indicating he wanted to get in that line. The people wouldn't let him. I said, "Why don't you tell them you're a big cultural icon in America? Maybe they'll let you in there." And he goes, "Oh, shut up." And he just
That's great.
Yeah.
And, I mean, as we talk here, the clock is approaching midnight Eastern time, which would have been his 97th birthday. So, we raise a glass, raise a toast to Jonathan. He was a very unique person. Certainly the positive, every good thing that has happened in my life, really, you can trace back to him because it all started there. It was where my career started, and by meeting Mary, that led to like my first apartment and my first job, and I mean, it's just so much good started there. And it was all for all of us, Mary, you, me. It was all organic. We may have all gone in with a certain degree of ambition, but it all developed organically, and we all benefited in our own unique ways. So it was a perfect situation,
Wow, it's almost an hour and a half we've been on here.
This is like the winds of war of podcasts or YouTube shows. Will be 27 chapters.
I don't honestly have any more questions for you guys, but
No, that's fine.
I really enjoyed listening to you both. It was really amazing to hear about Jonathan and the time you spent with him. I want to thank you both for agreeing to come on and join me. Thank you so both very
Well, you're
much.
welcome, Joel. Thank you for having us.
And thank you for giving us an opportunity to like take this trip down memory lane and have someone actually listen to it, opposed to being sitting in a bar like
whatever. Yeah.
I love listening about not just Dark Shadows, but the people who were a part of it, and it's amazing to hear your stories. It was truly my honor. It really was. For those who want to pick up the Jonathan Frid documentary, and you better go pick it up because it's amazing. Link will be in the description box for the Amazon. You both did an amazing job on the documentary.
Thank you.
Mary O'Leary did a hell of a job.
Yeah.
I was just blown away by watching it.
You can also get it on Apple TV. You can rent it, and now you can also rent it on Amazon, or buy it.
Yeah, and I wanted to, just before we go, I wanted to share one quote that. So there's a guy named Dan Day who has a blog called the Hitless Wonder Movie Blog, and he wrote something that I thought is really compelling. I assume that most rabid Dark Shadows fans have seen this documentary already, but you don't have to love the show to enjoy this film. I believe that for those with an interest in acting and performing, Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid story, might even be inspirational. It defines Frid as more than just a daytime TV vampire. He was a serious artist who lived his life the way he wanted to.
Yes.
And he made a positive impression on many people during it. So thank you to Dan Day for that great review. And I think it really captures what we feel about Jonathan, and certainly what we feel about the documentary. It was both of us, speaking for both of us, it was a pleasure to be involved with it. It was a labor of love on Mary O'Leary's part, 2 years of work. Nobody would have done the job that Mary did. Nobody would have been as thorough and covered, particularly his theater work. No one would have been as complete in telling Jonathan's story as Mary was. And it's a gift for the fans, particularly those of us who have been around where, from back in the days when we used to have to mail each other videotapes in order to see any Dark Shadows, right? It's like that was the only way we could watch it. Dave Brown would record Dark Shadows off the air in Dallas, and
Ann Wilson gave me my first videotapes.
And from those days, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, to having this incredibly produced documentary on Jonathan available on DVD and Blu-ray and many streaming services. You know, great progress.
Yeah.
And so kudos to Mary for doing such a great job, and you know, definitely encourage everybody out there in the audience to, you know, take a look. And it's only a couple bucks if you want to rent it on Amazon before you buy it. But I think you're going to want to buy it because it's like,
you want to see it a few times yeah.
And all of the special features. I mean, there are things on here that you're going to want to watch. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you, Jewel, for having us
Jewel.
on. We really appreciate it.
No,
And
it's my honor. Thank you
Okay.
both.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
You guys
Good
have
night.
a great night.
Thanks,
Good night.
Nancy. Great seeing you. We'll talk soon.
Okay.